How has the Church Clothes series impacted me personally? One, as an artist, because the freedom that I saw Lecrae approach this project with, and this entire catalog of Church Clothes, the freedom he approached it with was inspiring for me to be able to communicate a truth of where you are and do it in a way that's still artistically impressive. Probably the other side of that coin would be, as a biracial man, a black man, one who identifies as a person who is seen as a minority in this country, I've recognized how giving voice to someone's story, the plight of a people, the history of a country, even in this Church Clothes 4 song, when my man is like, they don't talk about the history of it. So there's so much to pull from that it moved me to the point of being like, yo, I'm invested now, I can't wait. I remember looking at the cover of, I wanna say it was Church Clothes 3, and he's in front of this vintage car with this Harlem Renaissance look about him with the cap on. I was like, that is so us. Like, it fits the narrative of who I am as a person, who we are as a people, and I just see I feel like he's keeping the narrative going, the music, all of that. So yeah, it definitely impressed upon me in a couple of ways.
Yeah, I remember my first time hearing Church Clothes, very first Church Clothes. I had just graduated college, and he had this song called Sacrifice, and I remember I had all these job opportunities and stuff like that, and was doing a bunch of interviews, literally flying to different states and stuff, and I knew that God had it on my heart to go into ministry, and like my folks was disappointed in me, and long story short, when I heard him on that record talking about the sacrifices he made, you know, moving his family and doing things people would say somebody in his position shouldn't do, it just really landed on me, like, man, this guy is really about what he's saying he's about, and you know, somebody I could look at and see myself in. And I just remember that song, Sacrifice, man, it just stuck with me. And it really helped me make a tough decision to follow God despite what my family was saying.
Man, when I was a preteen, I mean, I think this is how a lot of people get introduced to this genre, but I grew up in the church, wasn't allowed to hear anything else, so I knew Lecrae. I remember when Church Clothes, the single came out, Church Clothes, the song, my grandma and my grandpa were pastors at a church, and I downloaded it on their phone, left it there, heard it, because I was just going crazy. My grandma gives me a call, tells me to come to her house, and she's like, you need to get over here now. What is this that you're listening to? And she's just going off on me and how disrespectful it is, and just, you know, because he's talking to the pastors. And I think, looking back in hindsight, the fact that it would rattle people that much to the core of speaking this kind of truth is just testament to the power in the words that he had, the impact that he was making, shaking the culture in that way. Eventually, growing up and now becoming an artist myself, seeing my grandma, you know, all she has is respect for him. It's a crazy story to tell, looking back from how Lecrae dropping Church Clothes, shaking the culture, to now it becoming something different to what we see now. It's just an amazing thing, and I'll forever carry that memory with me.
It felt like Church Clothes was like a blending of the soil that raised us and the faith that saved us. And I feel like that was the first time I kind of saw Lecrae actually bring those two together in the most authentic way that he could. So that's the thing that really blew me away about the Church Clothes series. It's like, oh, you're from this soil for real, but then you still are, you know, representing the faith that saved you at the same time. And I had never seen anything like that in my life.
The Church Clothes series has impacted me in a cool way. CC1, I remember hearing like Don Cannon, hearing like Ninth Wonder and Boy Wonder on that production. I was like, wow, I feel like Christian hip hop's at a super like dope level for the production quality and the stamp and the cosign. So Church Clothes 1 was when I heard Lecrae in a way that I never heard him before, and I was like instantly a fan. Church Clothes 3, which is like an interesting take, is actually my favorite Church Clothes project. I love what S1 and Lecrae did. I love it. It's my favorite. But I feel like we may have kind of beat, you know, all the Church Clothes projects on CC4. That's what I think, but I'm definitely biased. So, I mean, let's see what people think about it.
A memory that comes to mind for me with Church Clothes is actually like the first Church Clothes. So it came out around the time I was in high school, and I remember being in algebra class being like, oh snap, the album's dropping, oh snap. And so like I had to listen to it like during class. But I remember I was so lit, and I think this is around the time like Lecrae was first getting like mainstream looks. So I remember like we were so lit, like, oh yes, you know, Christians, we out here. Oh, we heard the cannon, like on the beat and stuff. So I think for us, it was like a really crazy time just seeing like, oh snap, like the mainstream world is messing with the Christian world, especially since mixtapes were a big thing too. Like Lil Wayne was having his moment, so it was like a big deal that this mixtape was top tier, but then at the same time he was being authentically himself. And I think it was crazy too because it was around like the first time you really see Lecrae like be like social justice Lecrae and talk about really bold topics that like, you know, normally, you know, Christians wouldn't touch on. So it was a really pivotal time in society, but I really loved it. It was really exciting and it was really different.
I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I think about the artwork. I think it was the first church clothes with the animation or the drawings, the illustrations. I really appreciated that because I think I was in a season where I was trying to piece together a lot of different aspects of my life that were kind of under the umbrella of faith. And for whatever reason, the Jordans, you know, the different kind of cultural icons that graphic had made me feel like all of the different aspects of my life could come under the banner of my faith without feeling awkward or out of place. And for whatever reason, that image was very powerful for me.
So the original Church Clothes series, I believe came out in 2011. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, which was actually my freshman year of college. And I remember specifically where I was in my dorm room when I listened to it. I just remember being a Christian in college, stepping, like, you know, living on the dorm, and you have friends that are believers, but you're also constantly around non-believers, and it just gave me a space to exist as a Christian within the context of Church Clothes. I think gave me language for what it looks like to be a believer outside of what had traditionally been a very legalistic sense in the church. And it just gave language to what it was like to be, you know, my age, a young adult who really loved Jesus, but also wanted to exist within culture and figure out what it looked like to be a light within culture. The series of Church Clothes just has walked me through different phases of my life, from that first year in college to now, full circle. I just think Lecrae always knows how to speak into the identity of the church within the context that the church is in that present time and day. And it was relevant when he released Church Clothes 1 and 2 and 3. And now you're hearing him once again address matters of the church within his cultural context.
For me, it's gonna be pretty much like how I found out about Lecrae. My little cousin had told me about him. I would kind of remember like hearing like the BET Hip Hop Cypher freestyle, but not really knowing it was him. And then one day I was just kind of randomly like online, and I just decided like, all right, cool, let me look up Lecrae. And then I searched his name, and then what came up was like the original Church Clothes record, and then that BET freestyle was like right under it. And it was like this aha moment. I kind of like connected the dots of like, oh dang, like he was the artist that was like on that BET freestyle, plus that was kind of like the initial introduction.
For me, Church Clothes hits a little different. That's my childhood. Church Clothes 1 and 2 came out, and I felt seen as a young Christian in school, feeling like the only one who had these complex thoughts about Christianity and what it means to be a Christian in this new world that we were coming up in. And so it really shaped my perspective and my culture as, number one, a young Black girl, and also a young Christian in general, who loves hip hop, who loves the culture that I was raised in, right? And then so to be able to have an artist that I could really rock with, that was trapping out lyrically and sonically, just meant a lot to me. And then to see the progression up until now, it's like, Craig's not playing. He's had an agenda from day one, and whether he realizes it or not, Church Clothes has always pushed.
I remember listening to pretty much all the Church Clothes. They were all amazing, and they got better and better every time a new installment came out. I remember, I think it was Church Clothes 2, really when I started locking in. And I remember listening to these projects, just being inspired as a writer, producer. In my heart, I always wanted to work with Lecrae. I always wanted to really make it on the Church Clothes project. It has definitely helped change my just view on Christian music, on what it could be. It shows you that you can be a dope artist but still speak your mind and your heart. Continuously inspire me as an artist and a producer and writer to go higher.
You know, we came from radio in Atlanta, And when Lecrae first landed in Atlanta, his whole team, he just took over Atlanta. So by the time Church Clothes 1 came out, us knowing all the people involved, you know, knowing Don Cannon and all those guys, it was like, oh, he not playing. Oh, we doing something serious now, you know? And this is after Grammy nods and all that. It felt like he was taking us all with him into a place we had never been before. Church Clothes 1, I think for me it was APB. When I think it was the second song, and when it first dropped and you heard Thizzle on it, being here in Atlanta, it felt like we was on the track with them, you know what I mean? Like, this was about to be big. Everybody knew it. Taking it from there to 2, the graphic design, I'm a graphic design guy, the packaging of that mixtape was so amazing. And then the third one, honestly, probably the best sounding one. You could just see the progression, man. It felt like, oh, this is a movement. Something's about to happen.
I went to school with Don Cannon and the affiliates guys, and just hearing, you know, the blend of mainstream hip hop infused in the culture was amazing. And just knowing that, you know, we had a project that was out there that was monumental and was taking over. I mean, it was impactful. It just changed the whole landscape of what music is doing. Every volume of Church Clothes feels like a transition of Lecrae's journey. And we get to go along and follow that, you know, and it's you hear growth, you hear progression, you hear so many different things coming from that project, and it just tops off, and I can't wait to hear Volume 4, because I just think it just keeps getting better and better.
I've been doing Christian hip hop, Christian rap, gospel rap, whatever you want to call it, for years, and proving people like, man, this is good, and there's always been a fight, there's always been a tussle, there's always been this. But I think with Church Clothes was just something different, man. It was a phenomenon. And I think also people who was not normally known onto Christian rap and stuff, they were reaching out to him. I remember when T-Bone was in Fighting Temptation. I remember when Grits was on Fast and Furious soundtrack. I remember when Cross Movement had a video on BT or Trip on 106 in Park. And those moments was dope for our community, but at the same time, for us, I felt like the mainstream came to us with Church Clothes. And Lecrae delivered. He knocked it out the park. From him going into that throwback jersey, throwing off the robe in the first Church Clothes video, it was just amazing, man. And I think that just set a precedent to me that we're here. We are here. You can't deny us, we are here.
Lecrae's Church Clothes series impacted me in a way that I didn't think that it would, honestly. When I first heard about this project, I was worried, right? I was in the middle, because the first thing out of Lecrae's mouth was, this project is not for the church. And the only music that he had been making was music for the church, so I didn't know how to take this. But once I heard it, once I heard his heart behind it, once that first single dropped, Church Clothes, like, it was all over with, and you didn't have any questions after that moment. It truly made me see that you could make music preaching hope to the streets. You could condemn the church. You could be honest about where you stood with the church, yet still preach hope to the streets and let them know that there was hope in Jesus. So it was a wild, wild time.
Yeah, it was definitely impactful. I think that at that time, I hadn't heard anybody call out church culture. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it was definitely something that was scary, something that I didn't quite understand at the time. And I'm like, oh, what is Lecrae doing? You know, and I definitely understand what he was trying to do at that time. And not to mention the project itself. When we talk about sonically how it was, how daring it was for him to switch his content and kind of talk about different things and offer something that was for the streets, you know, at that time, and not just for the church, but authentically still be himself and stand firm on his faith. I think that was what was so impactful and dope about it.
You know, he took a lot of risk when it came to this project. I mean, we're talking about putting it on a website that hosted classic
Dat Piff. At that time, you have to realize, like, for your project to be on Dat Piff at that time, if I'm not mistaken, he had a banner at the top, and it was really advertised and pushed on that website. For it to be on that website at that time was a big, huge thing. You know what I'm saying? My homeboy was the one that, if I'm not mistaken, he was the one that showed me that it was on Dat Piff. And he wasn't into Christian hip hop. He was like, Lecrae Church Clothes. You're like, who is this? I'm like, oh, Lecrae on Dat Piff. Like, that was crazy at the time.
Yeah, it was definitely different. So it's just as far as impact, it kind of puts you in a state like if you were going to be a fan of Lecrae, this was your moment to take a stand. You know what I'm saying? If you were ready to jump off the ship, this was the time to jump off the ship. So yeah, it was definitely a different moment and a different impact just all together.
Man, I remember I was on 168th Street when the first one dropped. We listened to the opening track. I remember it just came out. We put it on, and he was saying some things. And I remember just being like, oh, you could really address those topics. So every time I think about the Church Close series, I think Lecrae's gonna say some things that's gonna stir some things up in a good way. And he's always gonna come with the bars. It's like his hard-hitting mixtape era. And mixtape era is some of the best eras from artists because it almost feels like the pressure's off and they're just like in their flow, you know what I'm saying? Getting bars off and just, it's like hip hop. So the way that impacted me, Church Close is like the intersection of really thoughtful Christianity and like top tier hip hop. It's the cross section where that happens, and there's not many places that happens. And it's ill. That happens, and there's not many places that happens. And it's ill.